June 15, 1942. At the Ford Motor Company plant in Detroit, Michigan, the air buzzed with the relentless rhythm of machinery. The smell of burning metal mingled with the sharp tang of oil and grease, clinging to the heavy canvas overalls of engineers hunched over drafting tables. Sparks flew as welders shaped steel into hulls that looked like neither boats nor trucks, yet somehow both. Captain John L. Smith of the U.S. Army Ordnance Corps leaned over a blueprint, his brow furrowed, a pencil tapping impatiently against the table. "It has to float, John, but it must also drive on roads like a tank," he muttered, almost to himself. Around him, a team of engineers and mechanics wrestled with the impossible. A vehicle that could leave the deck of a transport ship, cut through crashing surf, and then push forward across broken streets, muddy fields, or rubble-strewn towns, all without pause. Outside, the roar of test engines echoed across the yard. Prototype hulls bobbed in the shallow test pools, then surged onto the concrete ramps as tires gripped the ground with uncanny force. Lieutenant Henry Adams, overseeing the trials, shouted over the clatter, "Watch her take the ramp. This is exactly what the boys will need on D-Day." The amphibious vehicle, soon to be known as the DUKW, was more than metal and engines. It was a promise of mobility, a solution to a problem that had haunted Allied strategists since the first amphibious landings in North Africa. The design was deceptively simple on paper. A watertight hull, a rear-mounted propeller, 6 wheels powered by a single engine. But translating theory into reality was a battlefield of its own. Every weld, every joint, every seam had to withstand the pounding of surf, the heat of desert sun, and the cold European mud. As Smith paced, he imagined the trucks emerging from stormy waves, soldiers clinging to sides, cargo secured against sudden jolts, unstoppable, relentless, and resilient. By sunset, the first fully operational DUKW rumbled down the assembly line. Its olive-drab frame gleamed under the factory lights, tires slick with test water residue. Engineers circled, tools in hand, eyes wide with anticipation. Adams climbed into the driver's seat, hands gripping the wheel as though it were the helm of a battleship. A deep rumble filled the room. The DUKW moved forward, slid into the shallow pool outside, and then, almost magically, transformed from a truck into a boat, gliding effortlessly over the water's surface. The team cheered, though Adams remained focused. "This is more than a test. This is war in motion," he said, eyes scanning the horizon as if he were already on a beach in Normandy or a riverbank in Italy. The DUKW was not merely a vehicle, it was a statement, a declaration that Allied forces would no longer be stopped by mud, waves, or broken streets. Engineers had birthed a machine that could carry men, weapons, and hope from ship decks directly to the front lines. Unbroken, unyielding, unstoppable. July 3, 1942. The sun hung low over the Detroit River, casting long reflections on rippling water. Lieutenant Adams and a small squad of engineers had loaded the first batch of DUKWs onto a flatbed, rumbling toward the docks. The air smelled of riverweed, diesel, and anticipation. Soldiers in crisp olive uniforms watched curiously as the strange 6-wheeled vehicles were lowered into the water, their hulls bobbing like massive green turtles. Adams climbed into the lead DUKW, glancing back at the crew. "Remember, it's not just about floating. It's about moving from one world to another, water to land, without ever stopping." With that, he engaged the engine. The propeller churned the river into frothy waves, and the DUKW surged forward. The first test was deceptively simple. Enter the water, navigate a short stretch of river, and drive ashore on the muddy banks. But the engineers knew every movement would reveal the machine's flaws. Water leaked through a seam in the hull. A wheel struggled in the mud. Adams barked orders, mechanics scrambling to tighten fittings and adjust the rudder. Each correction was immediate, precise. Failures here could be deadly on the battlefield. After hours of repeated trials, the DUKWs performed flawlessly. They sliced through waves, bounced over submerged obstacles, and climbed steep banks as if they were an extension of the river itself. Private First Class Thomas Green, sitting on the rear bench, grinned as water splashed against his helmet. "Feels like we're driving a battleship on wheels," he shouted over the roar of the engine. Adams allowed himself a small smile. This was exactly the reaction he had hoped for. Exhilaration mixed with confidence. Next came the challenge of heavy loads. Engineers piled sandbags, crates of ammunition, and even small jeeps onto the vehicles. The DUKWs barely hesitated. Engines growled, tires sank slightly into the soft riverbank, but then gripped again, propelling the trucks onward. Adams watched intently, calculating the potential impact on future amphibious assaults. He could already imagine Normandy, where soldiers and supplies would pour directly from transport ships onto beaches, bypassing treacherous landing craft that had doomed countless missions in earlier campaigns. But it wasn't just about weight. The DUKW needed to handle chaos, gunfire, debris, the unpredictability of war. Simulated exercises involved obstacles, overturned small boats, and even timed maneuvers under strobe lights meant to mimic artillery flashes. Each trial honed the vehicle and its drivers. By dusk, the engineers were exhausted, soaked to the bone, but a sense of triumph hung over the river docks. The amphibious tractor was no longer an idea. It was a tangible force, ready to revolutionize warfare. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the river a fiery orange, Adams climbed out of the lead DUKW and wiped sweat from his brow. "Tomorrow," he murmured, staring at the fleet of vehicles lined up like soldiers ready for inspection. "We take them to the open lakes. We see how they'll perform in the real world." The night air carried the distant clatter of motors and the faint smell of oil, a promise that these machines would soon carry men to battle and back, unhindered. Unstoppable August 12, 1942. Lake Michigan stretched endlessly under a gray sky, waves slapping against the wooden piers with relentless force. The first full flotilla of DUKWs had arrived, and the engineers, now joined by seasoned Army and Navy personnel, faced their ultimate test, proving that these amphibious tractors could survive and thrive in the chaos of open water and unforgiving shoreline. Lieutenant Adams stood at the bow of the lead vehicle, binoculars pressed to his eyes, feeling the spray of lake water on his face. Behind him, the other DUKWs lined up like green armored crocodiles, engines rumbling in unison. The mission for the day was simple in theory. Deploy from a simulated transport ship, navigate the lake's choppy waters, reach a designated beachhead, and advance inland over rugged terrain. In practice, it was anything but simple. The first launch was dramatic. Waves crashed against the hulls, tossing soldiers and cargo alike. The rear-mounted propellers churned furiously, sending clouds of white water cascading along each side. Private Green gripped the bench rail as the vehicle pitched forward, bracing against the surge. "Hold on!" he yelled over the roar. The DUKW responded like a living creature, surging, bouncing, but never faltering. Tires found grip on slick mud as the vehicle climbed the embankment, transitioning seamlessly from waterborne craft to land-going truck. The engineers erupted in cheers. Next came speed and maneuverability trials. The flotilla weaved around floating obstacles, simulated debris, overturned boats, and even explosive dummies designed to mimic naval mines. Drivers learned to compensate for the unusual handling, balancing wheel traction with propeller thrust. Sergeant Carl Henderson, a veteran of amphibious exercises, leaned out of the cab and shouted orders to a trailing DUKW. "Keep her steady. Don't let the back end fishtail. Each maneuver tested not only the vehicles, but the men who would eventually rely on them in combat. The final trial of the day was the inland run, a grueling stretch of rocky, uneven ground meant to simulate the streets and fields of occupied territory. The DUKWs, loaded with sandbags and crates, powered forward relentlessly. Tires skidded over rocks, splashed through mud, and climbed inclines that would have stalled a conventional truck. Soldiers riding the vehicles gripped whatever they could, thrown side to side. Yet the DUKWs kept moving without pause. Engineers recorded every strain on the hull, noting weak points to reinforce, every success a testament to meticulous design. By nightfall, the flotilla returned to the docks, engines hissing steam as exhausted crews disembarked. Lieutenant Adams surveyed the vehicles, mud-spattered, scratched, yet unbroken. "This," he said quietly to himself, "is how we take a city from the sea. No landing craft can match this." Around him, the engineers nodded, a mixture of relief and pride glowing in their tired eyes. These amphibious tractors weren't just machines, they were bridges, linking ships to shore, water to land, and hope to victory. As darkness fell over Lake Michigan, the sound of lapping waves mingled with the low hum of idling engines. Tomorrow, the DUKWs would move closer to battle. They were ready for the real test, carrying troops across hostile beaches, through surf and fire, and straight into the heart of war. June the 6th, 1944. The gray dawn over Omaha Beach was pierced by the distant rumble of naval guns and the staccato bursts of anti-aircraft fire. Soldiers huddled in landing craft, faces pale under helmets smeared with sand and sweat. Amid the chaos, the DUKWs, newly assigned to the 2nd and 5th Amphibious Divisions, waited on the transport ships, engines growling softly like caged beasts. Lieutenant Adams, now promoted to captain, stood at the railing of the USS Samuel Chase, 110 centimeters, eyes scanning the treacherous surf. "We trained for this moment," he said, voice low but firm, gripping the cold metal rail. Behind him, crews checked each DUKW one final time. Propellers clear, tires inflated, hulls watertight, cargo secured. Boxes of ammunition, rations, and stretcher-bound wounded were loaded with meticulous care. The amphibious tractors weren't just vehicles. They were lifelines, the difference between chaos and order on a beach under fire. At H hour, the ramps dropped. Waves slammed against the hulls as the DUKWs surged forward. Unlike traditional landing craft, which shuddered and stalled against the surf, the amphibious tractors moved with surprising grace. Soldiers clung to benches, helmets bobbing as water splashed over the bows. One young private, clutching a crate of rifles, shouted over the roar, "It's like riding a tank through the sea!" The DUKWs responded to every command, steering through obstacles, their powerful engines refusing to relent. Upon reaching the beach, the transition from water to land was seamless. Tires bit into sand, propellers continued to churn just enough to stabilize momentum, and the vehicles surged forward, delivering men and supplies directly onto the contested shore. Captain Adams watched as a stretcher team rolled wounded soldiers from one DUKW to another, saving precious minutes under fire. Every inch gained was a victory. Every intact hull a testament to engineering and determination. But the beach was only the beginning. Once ashore, the DUKWs pushed inland, climbing rubble-strewn roads, splashing through flooded streets, and ferrying supplies to frontline units. German artillery fired relentlessly, yet the tractors, armored against debris though not bullets, pressed on. One driver, Corporal James McAllister, maneuvered his DUKW through a narrow street lined with overturned vehicles, barely dodging shell fragments. "Just keep moving," he yelled. And move they did, unstoppable. bridging the gap between ship and city, water and land, chaos and order. By nightfall, the first wave of DUKWs had delivered over 200 tons of equipment and hundreds of men, proving their worth beyond any test pool or simulated exercise. Captain Adams, mud-splattered and exhausted, surveyed the beach now littered with spent ammunition and the echo of gunfire. "We built more than vehicles," he said quietly, a weary smile on his face. "We built the future of amphibious warfare." July 18, 1944. The sun rose over the port city of Cherbourg, France, casting sharp shadows across the bombed-out streets. The once proud harbor now lay in ruins, its quays shattered, cranes toppled, and warehouses gutted. Yet, amidst the devastation, a new kind of engine-driven determination surged forward. The DUKWs. Captain Adams watched as a convoy of amphibious tractors emerged from the harbor, their tires churning through rubble, engines humming a steady, relentless rhythm. Behind the wheel, soldiers navigated broken roads with the precision of trained pilots, delivering ammunition, fuel, and medical supplies directly to advancing units. Where traditional trucks would have stalled, DUKWs pressed on, crossing canals, splashing through flooded streets, and climbing over debris. Corporal McAllister, now leading a supply squad, maneuvered his DUKW through a narrow alley. Crates balanced precariously on the benches. Mortar fire rattled off nearby walls, yet the vehicle held firm. "Nothing stops these things," he muttered, eyes scanning for obstacles. The DUKW's unique combination of amphibious capability and rugged terrestrial performance turned every previously impassable street and waterway into a corridor for Allied advancement. The real genius of the design revealed itself in the chaos of city streets. Traditional supply lines had been severed and bridges destroyed, but the DUKWs simply drove across shallow rivers and debris-littered avenues. Engineers on site recorded every movement, every successful delivery, noting the vehicle's capacity to sustain speed under load, adjust to uneven terrain, and provide continuous support to frontline units. One DUKW even ferried a wounded platoon under enemy fire, the hull's design keeping them safe from the worst of the explosions while propelling them toward field hospitals. By late afternoon, the city had effectively been resupplied. Soldiers cheered as fresh ammunition, water, and medical supplies arrived without delay. Where months of planning might have faltered in the rubble of Cherbourg, the amphibious tractors had transformed impossibility into efficiency. Captain Adams, observing the coordinated ballet of movement, realized the strategic value was greater than anticipated. DUKWs could carry entire divisions across obstacles once thought impassable, fundamentally redefining amphibious and urban warfare. That evening, as the sun sank behind ruined rooftops, Adams allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. The DUKWs had not only delivered men and supplies, they had delivered hope, mobility, and a tangible edge against a desperate enemy. Engineers, soldiers, and drivers alike had created more than a vehicle. They had created a new doctrine of war, one where the line between water and land, chaos and control, was no longer a barrier, but a bridge. March 15, 1945. In a quiet clearing near the Rhine, the once bustling factory floors and crowded docks of Detroit felt a world away. Yet the machines that had been forged there now thundered across the European countryside, carrying the echoes of countless victories. The DUKWs, olive-drab and battle-worn, moved steadily over flooded fields, broken roads, and icy river crossings, delivering soldiers and supplies as if the chaos of war were mere terrain to be conquered. Captain Adams, inspecting a convoy along a makeshift supply route, marveled at how far these vehicles had come. Engineers' sketches and test pools had been replaced by mud-caked hulls, dented propellers, and engines still roaring after months of relentless duty. The ducks had become more than tools. They were lifelines, symbols of ingenuity and adaptability. Soldiers spoke of them with reverence, often naming their vehicles, a habit usually reserved for comrades in arms. Private Green's DUKW was called Wavebreaker, and he rode it with pride, ferrying men through flooded fields and rubble-strewn villages without pause. Across Europe, wherever rivers cut across advancing fronts, DUKWs had turned logistical nightmares into coordinated triumphs. In southern France, they delivered food and ammunition directly to units cut off by blown bridges. On the beaches of Normandy, they had saved countless lives by ferrying wounded under enemy fire. Even in the final months of the war, as armored divisions thundered toward Berlin, these amphibious tractors remained indispensable, a testament to foresight, engineering, and relentless testing. Beyond their battlefield success, the DUKWs transformed military thinking. Commanders began planning operations not around terrain limitations, but around the potential of these all-terrain workhorses. Cities, rivers, and beaches no longer dictated the pace of war. The DUKWs did. In workshops, engineers studied their performance, recording data that would influence amphibious vehicle design for decades. Their impact was immediate and enduring. Mobility, adaptability, and the ability to deliver men and material across environments that had once been barriers now became strategic advantages. As the sun set over the Rhine, painting the river a molten gold, Adams watched a line of DUKWs disappear into the horizon, wheels and propellers kicking up mud and water alike. He knew that the war would eventually end, that peace would follow, but the lessons of these vehicles would outlast every battlefield. From Detroit to Normandy, from lakes to rivers, from ships to cities, the amphibious tractors had proven that ingenuity and determination could overcome even the harshest challenges. In every roar of engine and splash of water, they carried the enduring legacy of engineers, soldiers, and the relentless drive to make the impossible possible.